and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking this old Slingerland aluminum snare drum and giving it a new lease on life. I'm a huge fan of vintage drums from all the major brands like Gretsch, Ludwig, Leedy, Rogers, and of course Slingerland. I don't consider myself to be an expert on any of the brands, but I do enjoy learning about these drums as they come into my possession. I've owned a ton of snares over the years, and being here in the Midwest, there seems to be a nice circulation of vintage drums always flowing around local communities. I was fortunate enough to provide one of my students with a nice kit free of charge a few months ago due to a nonprofit gifting me some equipment to pass on to deserving students. I told my student that I had a new set ready for him, and if he could, just bring me his old drums so I can find something productive to do with them, or at least use them for parts. I was pretty surprised when this old Slingerland showed up, and figured I'd take a shot at getting it back into nice looking and playing condition. From the little research I did, I believe this is a Slingerland number 140 student model snare. It has 10 lugs, but you can also find variations of this drum with 6 or 8 lugs as well. The shell is a ribbed aluminum and is your standard 14-inch diameter and 5-inch depth. My best guess is this drum is somewhere in that golden era of 60s to 70s drums and is mostly original features including Slingerland's unique stick saver hoops. There's plenty of pitting and buildup on the shell and the hardware, so my first task was to strip everything down and get this prepped to clean. After removing the heads, cutting the snare wires, and removing all the hardware such as lugs, screws, butt plate, strainer, and thumb screw, I decided to soak it for a day or two in WD-40. After a day, I removed everything out and let it dry and replaced the WD-40 back into the container because you can use this stuff for a long time before you end up replacing it. I'm part of a Facebook group called Drum Restorations and Modifications. I reached out to a few of the people on there to see if they had any advice about what compound I could use on the aluminum shell without damaging it. Since aluminum is a softer metal, I wanted to make sure that whatever agent I used wouldn't cause any further structural damage to the shell. I really just wanted to shine it up and remove the grime and buildup. A couple people recommended this Mother's Mag and aluminum polish, which you can find at most hardware stores in the automotive section. The process for cleaning the shell is pretty simple, just applying some polish to a microfiber cloth and then buffing it onto the shell. It took a real long time to see much improvement, but as I learned as you buff the shell, you need to switch cloths or paper towel to get the grime off instead of just swirling it around the shell. I ended up grabbing this 2x4 and giving myself a little nicer work surface since the shell is so thin. After a ton of time working this shell from just about every angle, I finally saw a huge difference in appearance. I moved on to the hoops, and since the material is much more durable than the shell, I was able to use aluminum foil to knock off any pitting or rust. This really takes a while, but if you're patient, which I almost never am, you can really get this looking great. After the aluminum foil, I took some soapy water and sprayed it on and wiped it off with a cloth. After cleaning up the hoops, I repeated the same process for all the hardware that had previously been drying. Once everything was cleaned up, it's just as simple as putting it back together and throwing some heads on. When it came time to rehead this drum and tension it back up, I applied some white lithium grease to the end of each tension rod to prevent too much friction in the threads. It's never a bad idea to do this with any kit every once in a while, just as a precautionary step, but on a vintage drum, I'll do this every chance I can get. If I have any beef with vintage drums, it's with the snare throw-offs. I can't stand the strainers that require you to tie a knot around it to secure the snare strands. It is what it is, but if I planned on gigging with this drum, I would probably retrofit something like the Indie Drums throw-off, which I've used on some other snares. It gives you a much more reliable tension and doesn't require you to drill any new mounting holes. After I got the snare set, I decided to tighten up the resonant head a little more, and almost instantly the head ripped. I probably was being a little impatient by just using the original snare side head that came with the drum. To me, it almost seems like it's never worthwhile to try and reuse a snare side head. So again, my project is paused for one more day until I can run up to the music store and grab another snare side head. I'm really glad I ended up buying this new head, because it was able to seat on the drum a lot easier than the original. So now finally this project is wrapped, and as you can see, the drum looks great and is ready to be played. I've included a brief demo at 3 different tunings, and afterwards I'll give you some thoughts on the drum. As you heard, this drum is able to create a cool sound at a wide variety of tunings. Ever since I stripped the shell, I've been blown away at how thin and lightweight the shell is. It weighs almost nothing just as a shell. One concern I have with this ultra-thin shell is the seam where it meets. I noticed the drum has a metal plate at the seam that's probably trying to give that spot some rigidity at its weakest point. I'm guessing since the shell is aluminum and not steel or something stronger, you can't just weld it like you might on some other metal snares. The point where this shell meets the resonant edge, you can also see it doesn't transition perfectly flush, and part of me wonders if that's why the rip started in the bottom head in the first place. The new head tuned up fine, so I'm not ultra concerned, but it does seem like a flaw in the design or execution. Overall, I'm really excited with how this turned out. There was a lot of sweat equity that went into it on my end, but for the cost of 2 new drum heads and an aluminum polish that was around $8, this drum is looking and sounding great. It seems like the value on these really varies from maybe $150 to $300 and up, probably based on condition and the amount of lugs. I think for now I'll be holding on to this drum as it contrasts my other drums nicely. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel for more videos like this each week. Until next time,